Hey guys, welcome to JReviews. I am Iceman, and my playthrough of the entire Warcraft series completed recently, and I wanted to do something special for episode 20 of JReviews. And what better than a review of the entire Warcraft RTS series? So the Warcraft RTS franchise has been a great love of mine ever since I was a kid, with each entry having something great and unique to them all. So let's jump straight in. The Warcraft series began with the release of the first game, Warcraft Orcs and Humans, in November of 1994. It quickly proved successful, earning it a devout following with its setting in a fantasy medieval world. It wasn't the first RTS to be released, as Dune 2, a similar in style RTS game, had released 2 years prior, and there is certainly some similarities between the two games, with identical control schemes of having to select each unit individually, and for groups of units being limited to only several at a time. Additionally, the gameplay loop of building up a base, collection of resources as a resource of income, and building up forces to go out and attack your opponent was very similar. Even the user interface was similar, with the need to click on individual production units for the construction of buildings, and the need to click on said buildings for unit production. But Warcraft shines on its own, as previously mentioned, with its fantasy medieval setting, and unique factions with the human and orc forces, each with their own strengths and weaknesses. Humans were more reliant on gold and less on lumber, and excelled in range combat, and had healing abilities, whereas the orc forces relied more on lumber, were better in melee combat, and had necromancy style abilities of being able to raise the dead as additional units. Secondly, unlike Dune 2, multiplayer was a far more popular component, and would go on to continue to be a popular aspect to all games in the future entries in the series. The story to the game was of a magical portal being opened between the human world of Azeroth and the orcish world of Draenor by an unknown force, which led to an orc attack on Azeroth. The orc forces were initially beaten back, but returned some 15 years later for a full-scale invasion. The game picks up soon after this invasion has begun. Narrative to the game is told primarily through briefings before each mission, with the only other method being on winning a campaign, where you would get to see a victory video. The graphics for the game were excellent for its time, and even today, viewed through modern eyes, look quite nice with rich 2D sprites used throughout. If you're into 2D style games, then you'll be right at home with this one. Nice looking game. Music in the game is excellent, with completely different music for the two factions, though the only catch is that there is not enough variety, so what may sound quite good early in the campaign will not be as much by the end. But what is there is great. Gameplay for the game, as previously mentioned, is very similar to that of Dune 2. That is the need to collect resources, which in Warcraft's case is gold from gold mines and lumber from trees. Those resources you then use for the construction of buildings and for the recruitment of units to defend your base and later to go out and conquer your opponent. One negative with the first game straight off the bat is that gold is quite scarce in many of the maps, meaning that you need to be quite careful in where you spend it, though this varies on the various missions, though I definitely found this to be an issue towards the end of both campaigns. The types of units that you can create was quite similar across both factions, with nearly identical in style units, with the main difference being in what abilities they had access to. Both campaigns follow an identical structure, with the same types of missions being present at the same points in both. This is another area that could have been done better. In both campaigns, there is a few missions where you go in with a set amount of troops to achieve a task, with no base to rely on. These were all quite fun, though very challenging at times. Speaking of challenge, this game is quite tough. If you're looking for a hard game, then you'll be right up your alley with this one, as several of the missions in both campaigns can be very difficult, and the Orc campaign in particular being the harder of the two, especially as the Orcs lack healing abilities. Multiplayer wise, Warcraft as mentioned has this in place, and it was quite popular back in its day. I recall playing the game at LAN parties quite a few times. Quite a good game overall. Bugs wise, the game does have a few, namely in occasional crashes, so be sure to save often, though these only happen every now and then. Expansion wise, there was no expansions for the first game. Overall, Warcraft 1 is definitely an acquired taste due to its control scheme and lack of more modern RTS features like larger units for grouping and group selection saving, but it's definitely worth checking out if you can look beyond that. Now onto Warcraft 2. Warcraft 2 Tides of Darkness was released 2 years later in December of 1996 and was an immediate success with global sales above 3 million units by 2001. It improved on the original in every way with an improved art style, music and campaign. The primary game flow is nigh on identical to the first game, though now you have oil as an additional resource to collect, and you now also have access to ships and air units, making for a larger variance in the types of units at your overall disposal. The story of the game takes a unique approach, as for once the bad guys are the ones whose ending from the first game is the one which this one picks up from. With the Horde having conquered the human land of Azeroth, the survivors have fled to the north, allying themselves with the elves and dwarves, with hopes to push back against the invading orc forces. The game then picks up soon after. Just as with the first game, story is only told via the briefings prior to missions and cutscene videos. However, there was more cutscenes in this one, with additional videos coming up after every few missions, though they were generally quite short besides the end of campaign videos. The overall feel to this game is very similar to the first, with the same style of flow being present. Graphics, as mentioned, were improved in this game, though it does go for more of a cartoonish look. Spell and other effects, though, were vastly improved with more realistic looking graphics for them, and the overall resolution was higher in both the in-game screen and in the minimap. Overall, a definite upgrade. Music is really damn good in this game, with full CD audio used and more of a variance in the tracks. I absolutely love the music in this one and used to listen to the CD audio outside of the game very often. Gameplay for Warcraft 2, as mentioned, follows a near-on identical style to the first game, with the main difference being in the introduction of oil as a resource, a greater variance in the types of units you have access to, and the introduction of ships and air units. Sea battles play a large factor in quite a few of the missions and is really good in this game. The air units are a bit of a mixed bag. They cost a lot of resources to make and can damage other friendly units, and also have no special abilities. They are essential in some of the missions, but I don't like to use them often due to the high costs, and they tend to get killed quite easily. However, the scouting style air units are extremely useful and allow you to see stealth units, making them an essential unit to have at least one of in every mission that you do. Overall mission structure is very similar again across the two campaigns, with the same types of missions occurring around the same points in both campaigns. Difficulty is one area of major disappointment in this one, though it is all down to a major bug being present. What is that bug? Well, it's an AI bug to do with saving and loading. If you save and then later reload that save game, you run the risk of it leading your opponent's AI to switch off. By this I mean that they may completely stop producing units, stop attacking, or construct buildings, or even only just sticking to sending basic units at you. This makes many of the missions quite tedious and annoying, as prior to this occurring, the challenge level is excellent. It doesn't happen on every mission, but I did encounter it very often. My guess is that when saving and loading, there is a variable or two in the code that was not saved over, and so the AI is waiting for a signal that it never gets, and just so ends up in an endless waiting loop. Very disappointing to see in this game, especially given how long ago this game was released, and as Blizzard has released numerous updates to the game since release, but never fixed that bug. The other weird thing is, I clearly remember playing this game as a kid and never encountering that, but on modern systems it happens all the time. So who knows? Maybe there's some glitch in the system that is specific to like more modern versions of Windows? Who knows? In either case, beyond those aspects, this is an excellent game. Definitely worth playing, I absolutely love it. Multiplayer wise, just as with the first game, multiplayer is available and is really damn fun. None of the AI bugs exist with that obviously, unless you play against AI opponents, so you're guaranteed to have hours of fun there. Beyond the AI bugs, I don't recall there being any other issues with the game in relation to bugs or technical issues. Expansions wise, Warcraft 2 would go on to get one expansion entitled Beyond the Dark Portal, which picked up directly after the end of the human campaign. This one had no additional units, but is quite fun and definitely worth checking out. Overall, Warcraft 2 is an outstanding RTS game, let down only by the bugs in AI, but is otherwise a great game worthy of playing. And this then takes us to the third and final game in the series. Warcraft 3 Reign of Chaos was released in July of 2002, some 6 years after the release of the previous game. It is a game not without some controversy, however, which I will go into later. The game overall was a huge success, with just in the United States alone selling 1 million copies and earned $49.4 million by August of 2006 alone. The game features several changes across many aspects, with the move for the first time into full 3D graphics, the introduction of RPG elements, and a much larger emphasis on storytelling. In addition, the amount of playable factions was increased to 4, of the Human Alliance, Undead, Orcs, and the Night Elves, and one additional faction, the Naga, being added in the expansion, which I'll go more into later. The story to Reign of Chaos begins several years after the end of the second game, with the human ending this time being the one chosen as the in-canon ending, with the complete defeat of the Horde forces and the arrival of a new enemy, the Burning Legion, who later on are revealed to have had corrupted the Orcs with their bloodlust, who otherwise had been a peaceful race. Straight away, right there, this was one aspect that ticked me off with this game, as this was Blizzard retconning the intent of the Orcs, and would be a trend that they would go on to do with the Zerg with StarCraft 2 later on down the line. Not a good trend to start. In either case, the game takes a major change to overall game flow, to a more StarCraft-like cohesive approach of each campaign being part of an overarching story, and where the end of one campaign leads on to the next one, picking up directly afterward. I really loved this change, and for the greater emphasis on story that was introduced. Character development also plays quite strongly, with events having lasting effects on characters, both negative and positive. I don't want to say too much as to not spoil the story, but it is all done very well. Mission briefings are no longer present, with each mission or chapter in this game's case having introduction cutscenes which set things up and give story-related content of what is to come. Cutscenes now occur at key events and chapters as well. Video cutscenes again were present, though usually only at key points in the game. Graphics in Warcraft 3 are excellent. Some 3D games age bad over time, but I just don't see it at all with this one. In my opinion, the game still stands up today and looks great, but your opinion might be different. But for me, it looks pretty good. Music for the game takes a major change, with a move away from the more militaristic styles of the previous games to a more somber approach, though it does vary from faction to faction. The human music, for example, goes for a classical music style, the Night Elves and Orcs is something a little bit more tribal, and the Undead more akin to the Zerg music from StarCraft of something otherworldly. All very good stuff, just very different overall to that of the prior games. Now on to gameplay. Gameplay this time around goes for a more RPG-like approach, though the core game mechanics of resource collection, base building and army making remain, though hero units play a large role this time around. These hero units gain experience points from battle and from the completion of objectives. Just as with other RPGs, once they have enough experience, they level up, and you then get to choose what ability or upgrade to take. The introduction of these unique abilities for the heroes makes for a big change in how battles play out, with a far more of a RPG kind of approach to them, like Arthur's Death Coil ability acting as both a healing spell when used on friendly units and offensive when used against enemies, and so much more. Removed from the gameplay is ship battles and oil resource collection. Air units now have unique special abilities, though their effectiveness varies between the factions. For the humans and elves, I found their air units to be a waste of resources, whereas the undead's dragons were excellent and always worth getting. So it does vary based on what faction. Optional objectives now play a factor in many of the missions, often with item rewards for the hero units or access to new units of various kinds. Variety between campaigns is quite significant in this entry, with each campaign playing out completely different to the next, with a difficulty level that scales alongside it. By the end of the final campaign, that of the Night Elves, The difficulty level has risen quite a bit, and the final chapter in particular is easily the hardest mission in any of the Warcraft games that I've ever played. If you can beat that one without cheats, then you've done well. As a child, I was never able to beat it without cheats, but on playing it some 20 years later now as an adult, I was over the moon to beat it fair and square. That was an emotional moment for sure. If you're looking for a challenging game, then this is definitely a game to play. On the aspect of multiplayer, again, this is a really great game to play in multiplayer, whether it be at a LAN party against friends or on battle.net against randoms on the internet. Really fun stuff, especially if you delve into the mod scene, with Dota and other fun game modes getting their beginnings as mods for this game originally. On the subject of bugs, I can't recall any occurring during my playthrough of this game, which was really good to see. As for expansions, one expansion by the name of the Frozen Throne was released for Warcraft 3. This continued the story from the end of the Night Elf campaign, with the addition of 4 additional campaigns, 3 of which continued the RTS RPG style of Reign of Chaos, and one final one which took a far more Diablo RPG-centric approach. High level of difficulty to be found in Frozen Throne, but the final chapter of the Scourge campaign in particular being very, very difficult, right up there with the end of Reign of Chaos. Overall, Warcraft 3 is a fantastic game in all respects, with an outstanding story, great character development, a huge amount of content, and really fun gameplay. Now onto the bit of controversy that I touched on earlier. In January of 2020, Blizzard released Warcraft 3 Reforged, which it called a remaster of both Warcraft 3 Reign of Chaos and the Frozen Throne expansion. It featured new models for all of the characters, a new main menu screen, and was to come with a whole heap of new features. However, on release, many of the promised features were not included, and this, in quotations, remaster was forced on players whether they wanted it or not, as via Battle.net it would update Warcraft 3 to this version. This was a real dick move by Blizzard and showed a lot of how the company has changed after its merger with Activision, with much of the heart and soul that had been present back in 2006 no longer being there. Unfortunately, the only way to play the original versions of Reign of Chaos and Frozen Throne nowadays is if you're lucky enough to still own a physical disc of both games, and only if you don't update them past the point where Battle.net implementation was added in. Otherwise, you're stuck with a crappy Reforged version. No thank you to that. Unfortunately, Warcraft 3 was the end of the franchise as far as RTS games go. In between the development of Warcraft 2 and 3, a game entitled Warcraft Lord of the Clans had been in development, which was to be a point-and-click adventure with all-star voice acting. That game was cancelled in 1998, several years into development. We would also get the hugely successful World of Warcraft in 2001, which even today, some 23 years later, is still very popular. I myself played that for 5 years, back on when it was first released, and ran a guild there for much of that time. Some damn fine fun to be found in that game, and if you were looking for a finale to the story of Arthas from Warcraft 3, then that is the only place that you're going to find it. We also got the game Hearthstone in March of 2014, which takes on a Magic the Gathering style card game approach. I've not played that one myself, but it is apparently quite good. In either case, that brings me to my overall opinion on the Warcraft RTS franchise. Each game in the Warcraft RTS series has its own unique strengths and weaknesses. The first, Warcraft, shows an early glimpse into the Warcraft world and offers a great level of challenge, though it does suffer from a clunky user interface and a lack of variety in its campaign structures. The second game offers the greatest variety in gameplay styles from land, sea, and air, plus has great multiplayer, but suffers from the awful AI bugs, which ruins the gameplay experience quite a bit in a single player. The third game takes a far more RPG approach with rich storytelling and easily the hardest difficulty level of the games in the series. Overall for me, as I stated over in my JPlays videos of the series, the kid version of me places the second game as the best in the overall series, whereas the adult version of me who wants more story to put the third game as the best in the series. So I have to say that the third game is the one that nails everything, with its huge amount of gameplay that will keep you busy for weeks, its great story and difficulty factor, just make it the best one of the series all round. So for me, it's the best one. And that's my 2 cents on the Warcraft real-time strategy series, a franchise that I absolutely love and will always return to every few years. Great times to be had there. If you've enjoyed this video and would like to see more videos in this series, be sure to hit the subscribe button, and also just check out my channel for further videos and you'll find out what else is available. And with that, this is Iceman of JReviews signing out. Guys, have a good one.